Welcome, and thank you for joining the Market Surveillance Committee meeting. Before we begin, please ensure you have your chat panel open by clicking the chat icon located at the bottom right of your WebEx screen. For technical support, please submit a message in the chat panel box and click Event Producer in the drop-down menu. For all verbal questions, they will be taken during the Q&A portion of the event. To indicate you wish to ask a question, on the WebEx screen, click the raise hand icon at the bottom center of your WebEx screen. For those who are on the phone line, please dial #2 to raise your hand. Then you will be placed in the question queue. With that, I will turn the meeting over to Dr. Benjamin Hobbs, Chair of Marketing Surveillance Committee.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. And I hope that we get a chance to practice those instructions for asking questions by raising your hand or dialing #2 very soon. Looking forward to the discussion. I'm Chair of the Market Surveillance Committee, and with me on the Market Surveillance Committee are Drs. Jim Bushnell and Scott Harvey. And we also have ISO staff with us. Three staff members who've done the work that you'll see presented later in this session are Dr. Guillermo Bautista, Quinn Zhao, and also Zhu Lang. I believe that Quinn and Guillermo will be the presenters. Other staff that have joined us include James Friedrich, Shammy Davis, Becky Robinson, and Anna McKenna. And as always, we'll start by giving you an opportunity to make comments or ask questions about other market issues or phenomena that you care to address. But if it's about price formation, in particular, fast start pricing, I hope you'll hold those questions to later, but any other matters you can bring up now. So at this point, please raise your hand if you're on WebEx, or dial #2 to raise your hand on the phone lines if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question. And do we have anybody? Okay. I'm sure you'll make up for being quiet later on. As I said, I'm looking forward to the discussion. So at this point, I would like to invite Dr. Bautista and also Quinn Zhao to make their presentation. And we will be welcoming questions, as always, as the presentation goes along. And so we'll try to keep an eye and see if anybody's got their hand up. Guillermo, it's all yours.
Thank you, Ben. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Okay. Okay, let's start the conversation, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss this matter in the Market Surveillance Committee session. Last week, we presented similar material as part of the working group effort for price formation. And the topic that we covered today is specific to the fast start pricing as part of the overall theme of price formation. Back in October, we had a discussion with the working group, and we approached this discussion regarding the analysis needed to have some reference, some assessment of the potential implications of having faster pricing in the CAISO market. Now, when I refer to the CAISO market, I really mean across the markets, including the Western Energy Imbalance market that is applicable to the real time. The way we structure the analysis to help guiding the conversation in the policy design is composed of two phases. We have this original discussion in October to sketch the approach, and we indicated that we're going to approach this in stages. If we can move to the next slide, please. The approach we have considered for this is similar to other efforts that we implemented in the recent past, such as the pricing back in 2019, the CRR in 2017, and most recently with the resource efficiency evaluation. We are providing analysis regarding the first stage that includes some basic statistics about the generation fleet that is part of the CAISO's market, including the wind market. And there is also some analysis to cover the Bitcoin recovery. Anytime we are discussing about the fast start pricing, there is an implication for Bitcoin recovery make whole payment, because if prices are going to be formed differently, they may have an impact at the end on the Bitcoin recovery to some extent. Then we focus mostly in this first stage in building the foundational aspect of the fast start pricing mechanism. And we want to guide you through those components because I believe it's critical that we try to capture the main element, the essence of the CAISO market when we try to do this counterfactual analysis of the potential implications for fast start pricing. We took feedback from the participants. They submitted a set of written comments after we had the discussion back in October, and we internalized as much as we could for this first stage. The expectation is that now that we provide this preliminary analysis and we hear your feedback and also feedback from the participants, we can consolidate the scope of the analysis that is going to be presented in the final stage. We're expecting to have that material somewhere in March. And the scope of that second stage is still predicated on the feedback that we're going to get from you and from the participants. It still is going to consider for sure expansion of this analysis to include all the Western energy imbalance market entities, all the areas. We also want to include the mechanism that we may have to still define what the type of others we want to include for the fast start pricing. And as you will see through the conversation, there are many characteristics that have to be defined in order to come with a final approach of what fast start pricing may look like for the CAISO if we decide to pursue that option. And what I was indicating last week is that in order for us to do some type of analysis and potential implications of that fast start pricing, we need to ground on some basic elements of modeling the fast start pricing. So many of these elements are discussed here, not because we are discussing per se the policy, or it doesn't mean that we have landed on what the final policy design should be. It's simply a matter that we need to have some elements to model the analysis. But all these elements are still subject to a potential and comprehensive policy design discussion. And this is precisely the type of information that this type of analysis can provide to trade off all these different elements that are critical for the design of the fast start pricing. Next slide, please. What do we have specific for this first round of analysis? We have a few components. The first one is that we have some basic statistics about the generation fleet. We are composing the statistics based on the resource attributes, the characteristics such as the temporal constraint and the startup time, the minimum uptime. We also go into a series of metrics to slice and dice the Bitcoin recovery by these resource attributes and also by the nature of participation. And then we have the analysis of the actual fast start pricing implications. For that, as of now, in this preliminary analysis, the scope was to apply this logic only to the CAISO area, even though we are accounting for the nature of the wind market, because we account for the impact of the transfers. That is a factor considering there. And this gives us the opportunity that now we can test all the features in this CAISO-specific area analysis naturally, now we can expand that to all the balancing areas. We also accommodated somehow the inclusion of the flexible ramping product. That is capacity that is set aside for ramping capacity needs, and is going to create an economical displacement of supply when that is accounted for. We also going to potentially the most critical component of the fast start pricing, and that is how do we incorporate the commitment cost into the variable bid. One way or the other, there may be different permutations to do it. And here we consider specifically only two options. The first one is a constant adder. We derive a commitment cost adder that applies to every segment of the bid. And then the second option is an option that was proposed by Michael that consists of deriving an average cost, accounting for the commitment cost plus the variable cost at every segment of the bid curve, finding the minimum level, and then defining what the new adjusted bid is going to be. Based on these two scenarios, we also have a second dimension to the analysis, and that is what type of definition do we use for fast start pricing? There are two critical temporal elements for resources. One is the minimum uptime, how long the unit needs to stay online to meet that temporal constraint, and the other one is the startup time, how long it takes for the unit to actually become synchronized and online. And we took just two options, and this is still another area for discussion. We consider one scenario in which we consider only units subject to fast start pricing if both the minimum uptime and the startup time is equal or less than 30 minutes. And the second option that we also analyze is if both the minimum uptime and the startup time are equal or less than 60 minutes. Only for those resources we apply the logic of the fast start pricing. So putting together these two permutations of the temporal definition and the type of adder, we end up with 4 different scenarios. Constant adder with 30 and 60 minutes, and minimum average cost adder with 30 and 60 minutes. These are the numbers you're going to see at the end of the presentation in organizing 4 different groups. Another complication that we wanted to take from the get-go has to do with a specific feature that we have in the CAISO market that is about modeling multi-stage generator units, what we call MSGs. And these are quite an interesting and complex models because account for discrete decisions. Similar to a startup, we have discrete decisions to be made when we decide to transition one MSG unit from one configuration to another. That involves, in addition to the discrete decision, discrete commitments. We have transition costs, similar to a startup cost, and also there is a minimum load cost for the 2 configurations. And the last piece, we also consider the implications of fast start pricing and how that interplays with the constraints that we currently use in the CAISO market that we call the minimum online constraint. These are capacity / commitment related constraints to ensure there is a minimum online capacity defined in certain area. Right now, that constraint is defined for the day-ahead market only. And therefore, given the fact that we focus on the analysis for the real time, there's really not much implication of the fast start pricing for the analysis that we have done. Once we consider potentially the day ahead, that will be one consideration we have to factor in, because if they are committed because of this constraint rather than by economics, the natural question is whether they should be subject to fast start pricing or not. For the real time, even if they were considering the day ahead, the fact that they are fast start pricing, it means when we come from the day ahead into the real time, it is the real time that is going to make the ultimate decision whether that unit needs to be started up or not. Therefore, it's going to be based on economics, even if that was originally part of the MOC in the day ahead market. These are the main elements that we consider in this preliminary analysis to come with the implications of fast start pricing specific to the real time, specific to the CAISO balancing area. with consideration of the wind market and with the capability to expand this to all balances in the next stage. Next slide, please. As I indicated, we have many key components in consideration for the fast start pricing. It is not the purpose of this analysis discussion to iron out what the features, the attributes of that market design should be. It is, again, the need that we need to do something for the analysis and the formulation of fast start pricing at this stage. All of this have to be discussed. We are just making some considerations of what we believe could be some elements to take at this stage of the analysis. And the considerations that eventually have to be considered in the market design has to do with different aspects. The first one is day ahead versus real time. Should we apply fast start pricing to either or both is a matter of discussion. Right now, we are applying the analysis only for the real-time market, specifically to the 15-minute market, that is where commitment decisions are made. In the 5-minute market, even though there are market clearing prices, there are not commitments done. It's only a balancing market. Once the commitments have been made, it's a matter of where we dispatch the resources. And the HASP market, this is an hourly process in which we have the last opportunity to clear hourly interties. Schedule-wise, these are the binding decisions. Price-wise, they are settled in the 15-minute market. So there are no binding prices in the hourly ahead scheduling process to consider fast start pricing. And naturally, also the day-ahead market. How do we go with that? That's potentially an expansion that we can do for the analysis. The other characteristic that has to be discussed is the commitment cost definition. Which resources should be part of fast start pricing? 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, every resource? That is still something that potentially this analysis can guide, because depending on the characteristics of the generation fleet that is part of the market, could serve as a good guidance of what could make sense in terms of what definition of the time to apply. There is another characteristic that is inherent to the resources that we have. There are some resources that inherently are going to have faster pricing. We have faster timings. For instance, solar, wind, and batteries, they are quite fast. But in general, they are going to have zero commitment cost. So whether we apply or not faster pricing may be a moot point, because anyway, they have no commitment cost in place based on the data we have seen so far. The other type of characteristics is specifically how do we incorporate the commitment cost, minimum load cost, startup cost, transition cost into the variable bits. There will be many different ways that have to be assessed for pros and cons, and eventually deciding what a specific logic to apply for the fast start pricing. And the last one that is kind of obvious has to do with the type of participation. Naturally, there are resources participating economically. They can be committed economically by the market. They are going to be given all the other attributes, the natural candidates to be applicable for fast start pricing. If there are resources that are self-scheduled, it doesn't make sense that they are going to be subject to fast start pricing, because self-scheduling means they are making their own commitment decisions. And similarly, we need to expand that for the minimum online constraints, because in some cases, the commitments implied by the MOC constraints are going to be to meet precisely that constraint rather than by pure economics. And this is less than black and white, because depending on the definition of the constraint, there may be some cases that even though they are part of an MOC, the market is still making an economical decision to determine what combination of units have to be committed. So it will require some tuning, some practical consideration of how to approach this MOC constraint and commitment for the unit. Next slide, please. And here are the two of the attributes I was indicating in the previous slide. We have different technologies. We have quite diverse generation fleet. We have PDR, proxy demand resources. We have storage resources, solar, wind, and they are inherently with fast start times. We have some hydros indeed that fall in the same category. Regarding the gas fire, there will be a wide spectrum of times that we may have to consider which one really fall into the category of fast start pricing. Similarly, MSGs, there may be some units that are specific to transitions. Some may be considered fast transitions, while others may be a slow transition. Similar to startups, we have to make the determination what makes sense to consider for fast start pricing. And imports, what do we do with imports? They are inherently fast in the 15-minute market unless they are 15-minute specific resources. We don't allow the imports to set the price because they are already clear in the hourly process. And then in the 15-minute market, they are basically modeled as fixed. They are not economically participating anymore. They were already clear in the hourly process. And the other type of participation, I think I already covered that in the previous slide, economical or self-schedule or part of the MOC. And even if they are inherently with the attributes to be fast start pricing, the practicality is that many of these resources have zero commitment cost, like the wind and solar that we see day to day.
Guillermo, this is Scott. You know, I think another category that ought to go there is whether or not the resources are scheduled to provide reserves in the day-ahead market. And so I think you ought to consider whether how those units should be treated in your analysis.
Okay, yeah. Let me expand on that, on the question, Scott. What we currently do for the analysis of the real time is that given the fact that we try to guarantee 100% of the operating reserves and regulation from the day-ahead market, they are kind of given into the real time. We may marginally or incrementally procure in the 15-minute market. So what we have done for this specific analysis is basically consider this capacity as fixed, and we consider that as given, and we discount that from the available range for supply. And that is when we come to the real time. I would like to explore the implications of your comment when we are doing that for the day-ahead market, when we are really clearing.
Well, I think there's an issue in real time too, Guillermo, because you might have resources that are on for reserves and you don't need the energy. And the only reason they're indeed not decommitted is because we need to have reserves on those units. So suppose wind was actually marginal, but we have to have units on for reserves. You know, I think we get anomalous results if, you know, so I think we ought to talk about that as part of the fast start pricing regime. And this is something where California and the West are different from the East because we have such high levels of intermittent output. We got to confront this problem, I think.
Okay. Scott, would you mind to elaborate a little bit more? If there are units that in the schedule and run are being committed precisely to meet some type of operating reserve, what is your take of how they should be considered for the price and run? That they should be able to set the price or not?
I question whether they should just be blocked on and not treated as dispatchable, because we really couldn't, you know, take them off in order to provide energy. I mean, this is a bridge you cross once you start having dispatchable units allowed to provide fast start pricing, is you don't know whether those units are online to provide reserves or on to energy. So, you know, you start allocating those minimum load costs in the energy price. Well, maybe maybe they were committed for reserves, and maybe you should be allocating those costs in the reserve price. So I think, you know, it gets much more complicated once you start having dispatchable units. And, you know, the NYSO design that goes back to 1999 never had dispatchable units. It was all fixed block units. We didn't have to worry about reserves. They were always on for energy. Once you start having dispatchable units, you know, with a significant range that actually are scheduled to provide reserves, I think you've got a more complicated world.
Okay, thank you, Scott. I appreciate the point. Yeah, we will take that.
And Scott, just to clarify too, is is this limited to reserves that would be procured in real time, or also those procured day ahead?
No, it'd be those procured day ahead, because we couldn't decommit the unit if we schedule it for reserves day ahead, you know? We'd be keeping that on regardless of whether the energy was completely uneconomic. And in fact, we have to keep the unit on. You know, it isn't a matter of we're committing that unit for energy, we're committing the unit for reserves. So if anything, we should be allocating the minimum load cost to reserves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is going to feed into the. We're going to talk about RUC, I think, soon.
Right, yeah, that's another thing, but I
Yeah.
think, but this is, you know, RUC units might be committed for energy, but, you know, so that's okay. But if it's if we really start committing units either for energy or reserves, it becomes much more complicated. So at least we ought to talk about that, because I think we want to be aware of anomalous prices that and outcomes that could arise if we don't make that distinction.
I have a question. I have a question, Guillermo. So in 2017, I think it was, the minimum online constraint issue, the use of those was addressed by the contingency modeling enhancements initiative. And I just need to be quickly caught up. We still have a significant number of mock constraints, or did we wind up lowering the number of minimum online constraints because of because we were able to implement contingency modeling enhancements? Or were those was the CME never implemented? Sorry, I don't remember offhand, but.
Oh yeah, there is a lot of history on all this, Ben. I may not be up to speed on currently how the MOCs are working, but I can tell you we still continue to use MOCs. I will have to get the trending to see if it has increased, declined, or stay same as in previous years. In the recent past, I have seen 2-3 MOCs for sure enforced in the market. So for sure, we continue to use them. I will need to get back to you. What is the trend over the years? Whether we have declined the utilization of those. Now, the other item that you mentioned, yes, there was an effort to implement the CME. It was a long-standing effort. I believe as of now, we have not actually activated that feature in the market. So I would say that as of now, we don't have an alternative solution to the MOCs. And the MOCs, for some of you that may not have that long history, were constraints put in place to get a better market type of solution rather than using exceptional dispatches, manual dispatches, rather than picking specifically what units to commit by manual dispatches. We can get this constraint that gives you some economically driven nature to the decisions of what resources are going to be online. It's a middle ground, but the drawback is that it doesn't create a price signal when these units are committed, because it's a commitment type of constraint.
Right, and the contingency modeling enhancements were intended to be a further improvement to actually consider how quickly resources could respond to a contingency and get you back to the operating point that you needed to be at within a half hour or whatever the time limit was.
Correct.
And also set locational prices for reserves, but it was, as Guillermo says, it was never implemented.
Okay. All right, thanks for explaining that.
Okay, and thank you for the feedback. I think Scott raises a very good point that we have not looked deeply, but it's a good consideration for the analysis. Next slide, please. This other item, as I indicated, is one of the key components in the design, because there are 3 main time definitions. One regarding the startup, the other is for how long the unit needs to stay online once it's committed, and the transition time, similar or analogous to the startup time. That is an open question. Again, for the sake of having an analysis moving forward, we took the assumptions of considering 30 and 60 minutes. There is also more subtle consideration when it comes to the minimum of time, right? Because as long as the unit is online, it continues to incur minimum load cost, different to the startup cost that is just per event. As long as the unit is at least at PMIN, it continues to incur the cost of the minimum load cost. So even attached to the definition of the minimum uptime, there is this subtle consideration whether fast start pricing should continue to apply beyond the minimum uptime or not. Still, that is an open question. For the analysis that we have been doing, we only consider that the fast start pricing applies through the time of the minimum uptime of the unit. And anytime past that, no bits are adjusted for the consideration of the minimum load cost. And again, for reference, we are using only two definitions, 30 and 60 minutes for the analysis that we have done. And this is a concurrent definition. It means both the minimum uptime and the startup time have to be less than 30 or 60 minutes. It cannot be one or the other, it has to be both. Next slide, please.
Can I get some, I'm sorry, Guillermo, can I get a little background? So I think the 30 or 60 minutes goes back to the original FERC order, which was withdrawn, what, 2016 or 2017. And it's one of those numbers that it might have been plucked out of the air or might have had a strong rationale. I suspect it's probably the former. Does anybody know the history of why 30, 60 minutes and not 120 or just 15?
I think it's because of the
How
history.
did that number wind up in the order? Go ahead.
I think it's because of the history of the NYSO fixed block pricing, which goes way back, and it was originally 10-minute start time and 60-minute minimum run time. And then it was extended to 30-minute run time, 30-minute startup time, and still 1 hour minimum run time. So that was the design that had been in operation for 15 or 16 years when FERC was issuing this order. So it was one standard, and then they considered some others.
I'm just having a little time thinking about how one would determine the right time if that question makes sense. And of course, I can imagine it's also system dependent. I could imagine, for example, if the peaks tend to be about, the system peaks tend to be about 3 hours, and what we're trying to get at is the marginal cost of committing and dispatching more units to meet a peak, so that you can make reasonable decisions about alternative ways to meet that. For example, a demand response. If indeed the peaks are not needle peaks, but tend to be sort of broad and across an evening, several hours, I can imagine that maybe the right number, at least in some circumstances, might be more than an hour or less than it. But I was just curious as to whether there's been any analysis at all, or, since New York used that number, we've FERC put it in the order, and that's the number that we're considering now without necessarily thinking any harder about it.
Well, the idea of 1 hour minimum commitment time is that the units can be turned off when you don't need them. When you start having multi-hour minimum load times, you got units running that are running for nothing related to system conditions, whereas units that can be turned off every hour. It would be nicer to have shorter turnoffs, but the fact is you don't have many units that can be turned off, faster than that. So that's a common threshold for quick start units, that they have to be they have to run for an hour for the metallurgical issues that are beyond my detailed knowledge, but I know they are a constraint. And then the 10-minute originally, and then 30-minute start times was units that are being started in response to actual load conditions, not for hypothetical things that might or might not ever happen. Units with an hour start with, an hour startup time, well, you're making that decision way before you know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you don't want to have too many units that are not on in order to meet load, that are on because of mistake or forecast error in this pricing design.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Given how the concerns that we're hearing expressed by stakeholders, storage owners, for example, about the implications of real-time prices and advisory intervals. I understand your point that you wouldn't want to become more dependent upon those, which, considering longer times, would wind up causing you to do.
And also, if you
Thanks,
start
Nate.
having units with multiple hour periods, you're going to not schedule imports that are cheaper because those units are running. So if you start applying fixed block pricing, you've got completely fictitious prices because the unit is on. You could have scheduled imports, but the unit is on because it has a long minimum runtime.
Mm-hmm.
And you could have scheduled imports if it had a shorter minimum runtime. So it doesn't reflect the incremental cost of load. It just reflects a beating load. It just reflects it's got a long runtime. So you start having these long minimum runtimes, and you are not making other decisions because that unit has to be on. Whereas when you get into the 10 and 30-minute time frame, if they can be off in an hour, it would obviously be better if they get off in 30 minutes, but at least if they can be off in an hour, you're not making many decisions because of, not taking imports or not taking something else, because those units have to be on for the next 3 hours, because you can always, if they're halfway through their runtime, you can turn them off in 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And just very quickly, I have no sense at all of the sort of minimum run times for modern combined cycle units in particular configurations. Can that run to several hours, or can you switch between configurations pretty quickly in a combined cycle plant?
I think Guillermo's got some
I
data
could say-
on the fleet. Yeah.
Yeah. We have some information about the startups, minimum uptime, but we didn't include, now that you asked for that or mentioned that, we didn't include the metrics regarding the transition times, and then that would be equivalent to the startup times. We can add that in the final round. And I would tell you, for MSG, it's a wide range because it also depends on the transition. Sometimes you may go transitions in the lower range of the operational range of the resources that may have inherent some slower times. But when you go into the higher end, for instance, it's very typical to have these transitions going up to the highest configuration, that is the burner. And these are kind of very fast, in a few minutes, and you are making the transition. So even within the definition of the MSG, you may have a wider spectrum of time. We can for sure bring the statistics next time.
Okay, I just want to get some instinct as to whether the units that are still that are in the market on and that have multi-hour minimum run times that extend that long, if they tend to be older steam units, for example, like the once through cooling units that will not be on the system forever, one hopes. Or whether the new units have been put on recently have such characteristics. So we're going to be facing an issue of units with multi-hours minimum on times for the foreseeable future.
Right.
If they have units like that, Ben, as long as the units that you're committing at the margin to deal with the load peak are the quick start units, the quick start pricing will deal with it, and the units that are on as base load, fine. Their minimum load costs are going to be recovered over the period, but the quick start units are going to be the ones that you turn on for for 1 hour when you're getting to the end, or you can turn off if it turns out that load isn't that high. And
Okay. All right. Thanks. Guillermo, you can continue.
Yeah, well, Ben, I think this is a good time to see if we have any questions before we switch to
Oh,
the
yeah.
second part, that is the statistics.
So I do not see any hands up, but let me remind you, everybody online, that you can hit the button on the lower right if you're on WebEx, or you can dial #2 to raise your hand. And we'd be glad to hear your question or comments at this time.
At this time, we have no raised hands on WebEx or the phone only line.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. Okay, let's continue.
Okay, I will pass it to Quinn to cover the parts of the generation fleet and Bitcoin recovery statistics, and I will come back for the second part.
Thank you, Guillermo. So hello, everyone. This is Quinn from Market Analysis. In this part, we'll start with some fundamental statistics to set the stage for the next part, fast start pricing impact analysis. So specifically, we'll be exploring the resource characteristics of the WEIM generation fleet in relation to fast start pricing, FSP. And we'll also be looking at the bid cost recovery part, BCR, within the overall WEIM market, focusing on attributes applied to FSP. So now let's start with the first slide, looking at some colors here. We've grouped the total capacity of the entire WEIM generation fleet, that is all the participating resources, by minimum uptime groups and startup time groups, presented side by side here. Minimum uptime groups are in pink, the startup time groups are in blue, and we use the same time breakdowns as Guillermo mentioned previously: 0, 30, 60 minutes, and 60 minutes and above. Notice these buckets are right inclusive, so 30 minutes goes into the first bucket and 60 minutes goes into the second bucket. As of December 1st, this is from December 1st numbers, we're looking at a total capacity of over 190,000 megawatts from CAISO and WEIM participating resources. Within that, approximately 60% of this capacity falls into the 0 to 30 minute startup time categories. And looking at the minimum uptime, or the minimum runtime, that term we used, about 46% of the share is held by resources within 30 minutes or less of minimum uptime. So that is potentially the share that could meet various fast start pricing definitions. Next slide, please. Alternative perspective on the resource generation fleet is to visualize capacity across different technologies. So here, each bar represents one type of technology. We have some aggregations on top. And within each bar, we have a stack of 3 startup time categories. So again, 0, 30, 60, cut. And the fast start units, those with less than 30 minutes startup time, are composed of mostly solar, wind, water, storage, the gas, and other types. So that is the pink color blocks there. The other types here includes the types like the hybrid resources, demand response, the Rs, different bios, etc. Next slide, please.
I think just a second, I think it's noteworthy that we've only got about 20,000 megawatts of gas that can start within 30 minutes. So, I mean, a lot of this other stuff is irrelevant. So, you know, that's the magnitude of potential, and, you know, then another looks like 10,000 maybe that could start within an hour.
Yeah, and this
Most
is
of most of the gas bin is longer starting.
Yeah, thank you
And
for the comment.
that would be tend to be older, like the ones cooling, but that's a lot of it. Some of this must be combined cycle.
Yeah, I think a lot of combined, I don't know all of them, but I know from plants, I know that a lot of combined cycles can't really start in an hour. But
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
We probably can get some more details of that in the next round. Thank you for the comments. Next slide, please. So similarly, we're grouping the min uptimes by technologies, and within each bar, we have a stack of 3 minimum uptime categories in the same color blocks. Units with short minimum uptimes, that's 30 minutes or less, are concentrated within the similar technologies as the previous slide, such as solar, wind, water, storage, and others. Notice that the majority of the gas units have 30 minutes or more minimum uptimes here. Also, it's worth noting that while some resource types like solar meet the fast start pricing definition, their impact may be limited due to the associated $0 commitment cost. Let me pause here. Any questions?
Just a little technical question for me. So, say you have a coal unit with 50% of its capacity is its P-min, and the rest is dispatchable. So, and let's say it's a 400 megawatt unit. Would we count 200 megawatts of that in the blue, assuming the P-min has to stay on for more than an hour, and the dispatchable portion of it would be in the pink because you can move up and down in the dispatchable zone? Or would the whole, if the whole unit, would the whole unit go into the blue category if you have to be at least at P-min or more for greater than an hour? You understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, that's the second case you talked about. So the whole unit would be going into the blue
So
because we count, we count the minimum
okay,
uptime
so
as the whole unit.
there are some, so there are coal units that have 30-minute or less P-mins. That's pretty remarkable. I did not realize that.
Yeah, this is from the statistics we got.
I had a follow-up question. Maybe it's related, maybe not. But I was curious about cogeneration plants. Are they included? How do we think about that, given that some of the commitment, if not all of the commitment, might be for the, industrial load?
Cogeneration, are we talking about co-located resource modeling?
Combined heat and power sort of situations.
like in the valley, in the oil, the steam injection things and other cogeneration facilities like that. I imagine that they aren't committed by the CAISO.
Yes, we can get back to the underlying numbers. Jim, I'm suspecting that we are simply taking at face value the Pmax of the resources and based on the other definitions of whether they are gas or not. But we go into the nuances of whether they are co-generated or not. We can be more surgical on that next round.
Thank you, Guillermo. Any other questions before we change topic? Seeing none, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so shifting gears, next we'll delve into the bid cost recovery, BCR topic. BCR is a mechanism designed to make whole units that are uneconomically dispatched in market. So this metric includes the BCR for all units in the WEIM areas. On this slide, we have a snapshot of the monthly total bid cost recovery payments spanning from January 2021 to November 2023. And a side note here, due to the settlement data availability when this metric was generated, November this year includes up to November 27th, and more recent days are still based on preliminary data subject to changes. So keep that in mind. Over this reported period, the average monthly BCR payment is about $21 million. And we observed the peak monthly payment exceeding $60 million in December 2022, and attributed to the high gas price conditions. And the set of BCR slides will break down the total BCR payments from different perspectives. And on this slide, each bar provides the distribution of a breakdown of the monthly BCR payments across different markets. We have IFM, RUC, and RTM here. And you see RUC, and then real-time payments make up the majority of the total payments, while relatively smaller share come from IFM.
One thing
Next.
about this, though, to keep in mind is that there is no IFM and RUC for the rest of the WEAM. That's just California. So when you look at the blue compared to the other, we got to recognize that, well, you know, the blue is for twice as much capacity or so, or output as the red and green. And on the other hand, the green, the RUC, is actually, the costs are calculated in real time. It depends on real time prices, they're not calculated based on day ahead market prices. So almost everything that's, you know, the amount of uplift is relatively small in the day ahead market, and then the stuff that's committed in RUC and then settled based on real time prices has a lot of uplift, particularly given that it's only a fraction of WEAM capacity.
Yeah, and thank you for the add-on. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the BCR breakdown by region and how BCR impacts different areas within our market. Let me just clarify, this region definition here is for data visualization purposes, not a market definition term. And for example, California includes LADWP, Bank, TID, and CAISO. So the primary share of BCR concentrated in California region, as Scott just commented, and more specifically, it's actually from CAISO areas. Next slide, please. This slide presents the BCR breakdown by technology type. So if you see the colors, the brown yellowish color is gas. The vast majority of payments are accrued on gas units. And there are some allocations to water and storage, but that's not likely commitment cost related. So this suggests that gas units may be the most relevant technology type for the fast start pricing feature, unsurprisingly. Next slide, please.
If it isn't too hard to exclude the uplift due to exceptional dispatch, so we're really looking just at commitment cost uplift, and then presumably the battery and solar and water would drop off.
That is a good point. So the way we gather this data is on the total bid cost recovery charge code. So if we probably can look into different features or the resource level information if we want to get that information.
Yeah, at least for, I think it'd be somewhat good to make sure that I assume that all this other stuff is ED and not commitment costs, but it'd be good to understand if there's something hidden in there that we're not aware of.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for that comment. Next slide, please. So moving to the next slide, let me see. We'll break down the BCR payment based on the startup time categories. There's a relatively even distribution of BCR payments across the different startup time categories, especially with comparable magnitudes observed for units with less than 30 minutes startup time and units with more than 1 hour startup times. That's pink and blue there.
So with all of this, I've been trying to kind of understand what the implications are for FSP, and it seems like this is sort of the critical one. So is it right to think that the blues here are basically not going to be involved in SFP, and the others might be, but they might also be getting BCR for things that are not necessarily committed or intra-hour, or things that we might consider sort of eligible for FSP kind of treatment. Is that the right way to kind of think about these magnitudes?
Yes, that's exactly how we try to present here. And again, these time categories will be subject to discussion, as Guillermo just talked about in his section.
Yeah, and it is a little, it's optical regressions here, but it does seem like when there are large BCRs, they tend to be driven up by the blues. That the oranges and greens are a little more stable, but that's again optical analysis. So
Yes,
anyway,
and
yeah,
thank you
and
for
so
that observation.
maybe this is where we're going, but then I guess the next question is sort of like, and this is where I was trying to get my head around the RUC stuff too, is sort of, we don't quite know where RUC will be or what it will be in the future. We're hoping that, it's sort of going to be more rationalized, and there's going to be some, with all the other market changes. And so, yeah, I'm trying to kind of get a sense of how much the RUC share interacts with a picture like this, or even if there are ways to try to think about which types of market commitment costs, which types of things are market commitment costs that are likely to continue under, optimal after market design changes and all of this, and which ones we think are at least intended to be reduced. Things like exceptional dispatch, maybe RUC, once we have better day ahead reserve scheduling and things like that. Anyways, I'm sure you guys are thinking of it that way too. I'm just trying to kind of consume these graphs with that kind of framing in mind.
The two thoughts on that first, Jim. One to remember is even if a unit gets a RUC schedule, if it's a 30-minute unit, it doesn't get started unless it's needed. So it gets started in RTPD. So it's really not, only the long start units get RUC commitments. The others are just told to be available in RUC, but then the decision is made in RTPD based on whether they're needed or not. And it could be a RUC unit that's committed or some other unit that's scheduled in RTPD. So I mean, that's really real-time economics, regardless of what it got designated in RUC. The other thing is, if you compare this and the prior slide, it'd be good to back out the uplift on the water and the batteries and so forth. That's probably ED, because that's a significant portion of this pink. So it'd be good to knock that out so that we can see how much of the pink really is potentially gas, or maybe just do this whole slide just for gas, so we can see what the amounts of uplift are on the various types of units. Starting times for the gas units.
We can definitely add that perspective in the next round.
Right. Although slide 12 seems to indicate that, the bulk of this is gas.
Yeah, a lot of it, but I mean, the pink part in some might be reduced by 50%. I mean, it's hard to do it
That's
eyeball,
true.
but
Right. Yeah, that's true. Okay, I see what you meant before. So when we were looking at like the BCR cost that were assigned to RUC, a lot of that, this is what you were saying before, is that they were lined up in RUC, but they weren't actually committed until real time, and so it's kind of ambiguous as to which category you really should put them in.
Right, they're really just a real-time commitment cost, and
Sounds right.
Right, that's it.
Yeah, thank you for your comments.
So, Quinn, this is looking ahead maybe to analyses that are going to be done the next calendar year after New Year's, but it would be very interesting to have these graphs for the simulations with and without fast start pricing. So later on in this presentation, we'll hear that fast start pricing could increase system costs by 10 million or so a month, depending on which system and whether it's 30 or 60-minute units. And what I didn't see in those later slides, and I'm getting ahead of myself, is whether that's net of decreases in make whole payments. It'd be interesting, if make whole payments are going down by 5 million a month or 8 million, that 10 million seems certainly a lot less painful than if that 10 million is the net cost increase, including already accounting for make whole payments. Well, painful for consumers, but something, of course, the generators will welcome. Do you want a hint as to whether the later numbers are net of changes in make whole payments or not? I know I'm getting ahead of ourselves.
I guess I'll leave that for Guillermo's discussion. So
Sure, that's so Guillermo, I'll ask about that when we get down to slide 31 and so forth, whether that's adjusted for changes in make whole payments. Okay, thanks, Quinn.
sounds good. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so after that, we break down the BCR payments based on minimum uptime categories. Here, the blue is the largest portion, and it makes sense that the largest share of BCR payments goes to units with more than one hour minimum uptime, and units with longer minimum uptimes are more likely to remain operational due to minimum uptime constraints rather than the pure economic decisions.
this is another place where it'd be good to back out the other units, because I bet if we took out the batteries and water, the pink at the bottom would probably go to zero or just about to zero, so that almost all the uplift is on units with a minimum runtime of 30 minutes or more.
We'll provide a set for the gas units only.
Yep.
In the next round. And thank you for the comment. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the last slide of this section. This one shows the CAISO BCR breakdown by minimum online constraint MOC. MOC derived from operating procedures may require a minimum quantity of a committed online resources to ensure reliability. And MOC, again, is enforced in day-ahead only, so it's only applicable for CAISO areas. That's why we only have CAISO BCR here. And units associated with any MOC constraint represent a relatively small share of the total CAISO BCR shown on this chart that's in pink. That's all the BCR slides for me. To sum it up, we've looked at how BCR is distributed from various angles, and this provides a holistic reference on various key factors to consider for the design of fast start pricing. So yeah, any questions before I hand it back to Guillermo? Seeing none, back to you, Guillermo.
Thank you, Tim. Operator, can we move to the next slide, please? Well, with that reference, let's move now into the actual analysis that we have for fast start pricing that we have done so far. Starting with the basics, we have fast start pricing. It's incorporating in some fashion the commitment cost into the variable range states. That will naturally lead to higher prices. We're going to be clearing at higher prices than standard methodologies. And it is expected that to some extent that is going to reduce bid cost recovery. The standard approach to implement fast start pricing is kind of relatively straight, given the current construct that we have in the ISO to construct prices. There are two market passes, market runs internal to the leading engine. The first pass is what we call the scheduling run. This is the run that determines the optimal schedules or optimal commitments and dispatches. And it also enforces what we call the scheduling priorities. We have a series of priorities defining the tariff for different types of participation, like set schedules, different types of exports. And when there are conditions that require us to clear the market in this uneconomical range, these scaling priorities become relevant. The downside of that is that these scaling priorities have ranges that are way above the bid cap and the bid floor. If we have a bid cap of 1,000, there are some scaling priorities that may have values of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. Therefore, the challenge here we're using the solution as is from the scaling run is that even though the commitments and the scales are thin, the prices are not. So there is a second run that is called the price run, in which somehow starting from the results of the scaling run, it comes with the clean prices, it forms the prices that are going to be financially binding. And it no longer uses this multiple of the bid caps and floors to set the prices and relates everything to the bid cap and the bid floor. So the resulting prices are going to be more meaningful in the economical sense. For some of you that have been tracking the CAISO market, a few years ago, maybe 2014-15, we implemented actually a change to this construct. We continue to have a scheduling run followed by a pricing run. But since that changed, we are actually using the schedules and prices from the pricing run. When we go into the standard formulation of fast start pricing, is that it's only a matter of clearing, forming the prices in the pricing run, and it's all about prices. If we were to right away implement this under the current construct that we have of using schedules and prices from the pricing run, we may have to reconcile that the current construct that we have, or potentially adjust the current construct that we have of using the pricing run results with the fast start pricing, because otherwise we may create some imbalance that may transpire into the actual operations if we use the solution as is from the pricing run. That is some consideration that we have to do as part of the holistic design of the fast start pricing if we pursue that route. The expectation is that this is for the sake of pricing, price formation in the pricing run. The fast start pricing doesn't change the optimal commitment and the dispatches. It's only to come with these new adjusted prices that internalizes the commitment cost. Next slide, please. We did some searching in terms of what methodologies are out there for applying faster pricing in the eyes of markets. And there may be small variations here and there. And indeed, after we had the working group session last week, we have realized that we may need more dedicated discussion specific to how to come with the others, the math behind the options, the pros and cons of utilizing one logic versus the other. So there may be more dedicated discussion down the road, and what we have done so far is just to consider two logics when exploring the implementation of the fast start pricing. One is a constant adder, and the other is an average amortization. We apply that effectively only for the minimum uptime, and there are other features or characteristics that have to be explicitly discussed in the policy design when we come to terms of what potential version could be implemented for the case of market. Next slide, please. I moved the math of these two others to the appendix in case somebody wants to go through that math. I'm trying to stay here at high level just with the illustration. Granted, given the information that I mentioned to you that we may have a more dedicated discussion later at the beginning of the year regarding specifically what to do with the logic or what logic to use for considering the commitment cost. So for now, I just want to highlight the logic that we implemented, and that could be also a useful reference for that more dedicated discussion we're planning in the beginning of the year. One logic that we use is what I call the constant adder. We derive average price and average cost per megawatt based on the startup cost and the minimum load cost, divided effectively by the maximum bit or the economical maximum. And that is an adder that is constant because it doesn't depend on the production level. It's just based on the max of the bit. And once you have that constant adder, you simply add that to every single segment of the bit of the variable range. Now, the second component of the faster pricing is this consideration that the units that are going to be starting up could be considered to be flexible, meaning they can be dispatched anywhere between 0 to the maximum value, unlike the standard methodology that only considers the Pmin to the Pmax from the minimum to the maximum economical range. And a simple approximation of it is no more than extending the first bit segment all the way to 0, just to have a flexible range going from 0, covering through Pmin, and then continue going through the variable range. That is just a simple approximation. And if somebody check indeed the original suggestion that we proposed in the discussion of October, we were proposing a slightly different variation of this adder. Rather than just dividing the MLC plus startup cost by the maximum bit, the minimum load cost was being reduced by the cost that could be already be covered by the Pmin at the first segment. So it was something smaller than the minimum load cost. Again, there are many ways we can characterize what the logic should be, and given all these different permutations that could be viable and which one could be more applicable to the CAISO market, we will have that more dedicated discussion later on. So if you see the right-hand side here, that is just a simple illustration of how the bit could be adjusted. We have the line in turquoise or blue representing the standard bit, variable bit range from the participant. And once we have incorporated by this constant adder the startup cost and the minimum load cost divided by the eco max, you simply shift up the bit. We're moving up by the adder of the commitment cost across the whole range in the same fashion. And that gives us now one way to incorporate this bid into the market clearing process by having a higher bid, internalizing the commitment cost, but also modeling that as flexible because it can be dispatched even within the 0 and PMIN range.
Guillermo,
That's-
I just had a couple, I don't know if I'd even call them questions. I'll think aloud and you can sort of confirm or deny if my thinking is right. But so it seems like the logic here is kind of basically implicitly assuming that the unit would be operated at its Pmax and then just dividing all these costs by that and applying it over 1 hour. And if the minimum uptime was just 30 minutes, then would this be twice as high for the first 30 minutes and then drop down to marginal cost? Or how would that change is one question. And I guess another question would be, what if it is actually only operated at, say, half of its Pmin? Then I guess we're assuming the rest would still be recovered through BCR, or is there some logic in some places that it should be extended to the next period because they still didn't get all of their recovery in some way?
Oh, yeah, these are great questions, Jim. Let me start with the simple one. Yes, it is assumed that it's going to recover the minimum load cost and the startup cost only when it's dispatched basically to the max of the range, not anywhere in between. And this is one consideration of this simple logic. So it's not based on where the unit is operating, simply by definition, if it were to be dispatched at the max. The second piece, it really goes into the nuances of how to design this, because you're right. In the appendix, I have specifically the math for this. In this case, it's very simple because the minimum uptime is 1 hour, so everything is very simple. When you have a minimum uptime that are anything different than an hour, then you have to incorporate the energy that is accrued only for the minimum uptime. And you're right. In general, if it is less than 1 hour, let's say 30 minutes, that means that it is going to be kind of twice as high just to be able to recover that in 30 minutes, right? So we adjusted that for the minimum uptime. There may be some units, for instance, that the minimum uptime may be 0 minutes or just 2-3 minutes. So we round this up to one interval, to at least cover for one interval. So there are some practical considerations to consider the minimum uptime. And the specific formula or the precise formula is in the appendix, and it internalizes the minimum uptime to account for that portion of the MAUT only.
And so that just packs all these costs into that. In that example, all those costs would just be in the first interval, and then if this is setting the price, then everything just drops down to the bid curve after that. Okay. And then, yeah, as far as if it's not taking it full out, then it didn't actually get its recovery. And if there's something left, then that's just sort of the residual that BCR is meant to take care of. If, for example, in this case, it was dispatched at 200 or something instead of all the way to 450.
Are you muted, Guillermo?
Yeah, I can't.
But Jim, in any case, you still have to have BCR because this unit could be dispatched to 0 in the pricing pass, so it wouldn't set the price at all. Even when it's in there, it isn't assured that it'll set the price. So you still have to have BCR, and a resource might or might not get it.
Yeah, these are very fascinating aspects, Scott, and you're right. Just to follow up on James' question, yes, there is a guarantee that they won't be able to fully recover their costs just because we adjusted in this way. And there will be still conditions of bid cost recovery. Now, by adjusting the bid in this way, it simply internalizes the commitment cost. is to lead to have basically bit stack in the supply. So this unit may be shipped to the higher end of the bit stack. The next one that was the most expensive next in line could be now setting the price that is something lower than this actually adjusted bit. So it doesn't mean that effectively this is going to be the marginal unit. It's very interesting stacking the bit stack that may result in something lower than this, because now this is one expensive and there is something already online that is cheaper. Okay, next slide, please. Can you see me okay? I'm getting some unstable connection.
You are a little choppy.
Okay. This second option is, I just simply call minimum average. It is more complicated because it doesn't estimate the adder as a constant adder that applies similarly across the same bit range in the same fashion. It doesn't calculate it only based on the maximum bit of the resource. Instead, it estimates the average cost per every single segment of the bit. That's the zone of the pin and 0, and then going through every segment of the bit range. The math is also in the appendix. It's a little bit more complicated. You have to get first the average cost for each segment, accounting for the minimum load cost, plus the startup cost, plus the variable cost up to the segment that you are accounting for. And based on that, now you derive by the generation of that segment, and that gives you the average cost for every segment. Naturally, what you are doing is summing up a variable bit range cost that is increasing, and at the same time you are summing up the minimum load cost and the startup cost that is decreasing, because now you are amortizing that over a larger and larger generation point, because every segment is with a larger generation point. So naturally, you now have an increasing plus a decreasing one. You get some type of convex curve that allows you to get a minimum point of that average cost. That is the minimum point that is going to define the segment of the start pricing all the way to the left. Everything to the right is going to be basically the original bit, because it's already guaranteed that you have a bit that is higher than the average cost, and therefore there is no need to increase that bit above that level. This got a little bit discussed in the working session last week and got a little bit complicated, and that was the motivation that created the need for us to have a more dedicated discussion at the beginning of the year regarding these amortization options. I want just to illustrate here the concept and leave the math for your own pleasure. You want to put that in the appendix. And the idea here is just the fact that it estimates that adder to be based on the specific bit range you are operating, rather than defaulting to the Pmax of the bit. That's the crux of the modifier approach here. Next slide, please. If we compare the three bits, this is how it may look like for this specific illustration. That illustration actually happens to be a slightly modified bit that we have from one resource that was actually bid in that way in the market in one point on time. So it's a real market bit just rounded up to conceal a little bit the nature of the original bit. You have the original bit that is at the very bottom in blue, and then the constant adder that is in gray that goes all the way from 0 to the bit max, and then the one in red that is the average cost option, that anywhere up to the point of generation where you reach the minimum average cost is just one flat segment to the left, and after that point upward, you have effectively just overlapping with the original market bid. And either of these three bids are the ones that can give you the market clearing price when you go against the demand, right? Because this becomes just part of the bid stack for supply. Naturally, depending on what you are clearing, if the bid is, if the market is clearing, let's say for a point that is in the lower range, like 200, either of the three bids are going to give you a different clearing price because in one way or the other relative to the standard original bid. If you are in the cost and
Breaking up there, Guillermo.
again, an exhaustive list of options. We pick just two. The first one, another ISO with some variation, but it's kind of the default option. And we will see what other alternatives could prove to be more effective to capture the essence of what faster pricing could mean for the KAI. So,
Guillermo, one point to take it back to what I said before, both of these formulas are assigning all those startup costs and minimum load costs to energy and none to reserves, but the unit might have been committed for reserves.
Yes, of course, and we go back and see how that makes things different and how material that is. Thank you for making that point.
I don't know the right time to ask these questions, but I'm trying to just understand the sequence of the scheduling run, pricing run, and how that would work. Because I guess I'm just used to thinking of the scheduling run as having these super high penalty prices to try to sort out sort of computationally different weird priorities of stuff. And then the pricing run more or less just smushing things in under lower penalty prices, but not necessarily reordering the supply curve. And it sounds like, so I'm trying to understand this, is the idea here then that when the pricing run is run, we're going to use these bid curves, but just push them to the far right now, or they wherever they would fall, with the FSP bid curve, and then they might not even, so they're going to get a different, they're going to cross demand with a different implied quantity in the pricing run than they're actually getting out of the scheduling run. Is that generally how this is supposed to work, rather than just sort of allocating? Yeah.
Yes, and I can elaborate on that. Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Guillermo.
Yes, I think you captured this well, Jim. The expectation is that the pricing run because we take care of the priorities. You no longer need all these extreme penalty prices to define what the sequence of the reduction should. When we move into, we don't start from scratch. It's not like we just forget about what happened. We already lock the commitments, dozens of the set schedule. So your starting point is really the scheduling run solution. So you start in that neighborhood that you know you already have a good solution. And we put some boundaries, we create some epsilons to allow the movement and the creation of the price signal. And that is the reason is relatively fine when we go price and run, substitute all the scaling penalty prices out for the big cap. And in the past, we found some extreme outliers, some edge scenarios where things happen and you start getting funky solutions. But in general, that's a good structure to have in place. The idea here now is we will go and impose the faster pricing logic. Right, reflects the coordinate cost. So effectively, we're using this modified bit supply stack that is going to be shifted up because now you incorporate this coordinate cost for the unit that were assessed to be coordinated, started up, or transition up.
And the bid range, sorry, the bid range for each unit in the pricing run then would be the entire bid range, not just the range that was dispatched in the scheduling run. Yeah, so you can get
I
just
think so.
completely different implied quantities, but I guess the whole point of this is just coming up with a single price that would then still be multiplied by the dispatch quantity that came out of the scheduling run.
Correct.
Okay.
And I
Just
believe
time.
correct. And I believe one of the implications that Michael, that has been working with us, made at some point is that by having this shifting of using these adjusted bits, there may be some conditions in which you may get some inconsistencies between the schedules and the prices, depending on how you build the adjusted bit for the faster pricing. I think that was one of the motivations to have the proposal of the average cost to ensure that there are no such distortions. So there may be something deeper to dig here in terms of consistency depending on what amortization type we utilize.
Mm-hmm.
And conceptually, Jim, if you needed the fast start unit to meet load, then it'd be dispatched in the pricing pass and would set price. But if the unit is no longer needed to run load and was committed and it's running out its minimum load time, and now you've got the wind is blowing and you need it like a pain, and you have no need for it whatsoever, it would not set price. So I mean, there is this, the logic is intended to, when it's needed, it sets price. When it's not needed, it'll still impact the price, but you won't get an artificial.
It won't be literally price. Setting the price. Yeah.
Right. And of course, all these things he's talking about are much more of a big deal if the units have a big dispatchable range than if they're a unit with virtually no dispatchable range, in which case the difference between all these little bid curves goes away and you're just adding the startup cost to the minimal load cost.
I guess there's still the question of whether that whole block might be shoved outside the needed range, but
it could not clear. I mean, the NYSO, that happened all the time. When something happened and we had a lot too many gas turbines running, they would not set price. It would be set by the dispatchable units, but in the scheduling pass, they can't be turned off till they reach the end of their running time. So they depress the price. So the price would be somewhat higher in the pricing pass, but.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for the discussion. This is very useful for us. Next slide, please. Let me switch a little bit the discussion. This is still in the foundational aspect of. This is specific to MSG, the multi-stage generator units. I see this to be somehow analogous to startups because when we have an energy unit that is defined multiple or different states, we capture those states with configurations. Configuration 1, 2 by 1, 3 by 1, 3 by 5. Just they may put in online. So when there is a transition for an MSG, we really mean that we are going from one configuration to another configuration. It could be upward, going up in the operational range, or it could be downward, going down in the operational range. This illustration captures just the very basic principle of a transition. We have a configuration that is 2 by 1. The unit, the plant. Let me step back. There are two concepts here. One is the plant. The plant is composed of many different configurations that could be operating at any time in one of those. That plant has a pinning. Now, within that range, the plant has different configurations that cover different portions of the range. The cleanest and simplest configuration of the MSG plan is when you have these non-overlapping configurations. In this case, for instance, one configuration is going from 50 megawatts to 200. That is the configuration 2 1. Then we have the 3x1 configuration per part that goes from 300 megawatts to 400 megawatts. This for recall many years ago when we didn't have the MSG, we are the model of forbidden region.
Yeah, Guillermo, you are breaking up. There's been a comment in the chat box about that, and I'm hearing you breaking up a lot too. It's not just the market participant, so I don't know what can be done, but
Yeah. On the is it getting any better or just continues to be that choppy?
Let's do a sound check. Go ahead, say something, Guillermo.
Hello, this is Guillermo. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it sounds better.
Okay, sorry, I'm just sorry the connection here where I am. And when we're doing a transition, we're simply switching from one configuration that we refer as the from configuration and going into the configuration that we call the to configuration. The participant for that specific resource can declare a transition cost if there is a cost involved in making that transition. That transition cost is analogous to the startup cost. So the question is, if we are involving this decision switch from one configuration to another, and there is a discrete cost per the event, per the transition, should MSD units be also considered specific analysis? We have a
now you're breaking up, Guillermo. We can't even hear you at times.
and what we have done, next slide, please. What we have done is apply the faster pricing logic to the transitions. So the action really happens in the upper part of the plan, in the configuration. That cost is going to be amortized to the variable range of two configurations, similar to what we did for the startup transition. Of the
Guillermo, check your plugin for your mic.
well,
It might not be in, or it might be in all the way, because you're breaking up really, really bad, and it's like we can't even hear you.
Hi, operator, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you've been in and out, so.
Yeah. Let me just do a quick setup to see if that improves. Hello, I'm back. Can you hear me okay now?
That is better. Yeah, it's not breaking up at the moment.
Okay. Sorry for design, not the perfect place for a connection here. I was indicating that what we are doing is expanding the startup concept to the transitions. we amortize the transition cost to the variable bit range of the two configurations. And similarly to the startups, we have to expand the range of the two configurations to cover the forbidden zone. Here's the subtle model consideration is critical in how we model the MSGs. We are only modeling the MSG as flexible only from the point of the Pmax of the from configuration to the Pmin of the to configuration. That is exactly analogous to what we do to the startups. We don't expand to be flexible range all the way to 0 of the plant, because the range between 0 and the Pmax of the from configuration is not accessible for the market. It's already modeled as given, because we cannot really operate that unit in that configuration unless we have another transition to go back to that configuration. So what it makes sense is that we just expand the flexible range only to the point of the Pmax of the two configuration. And the block that belongs anywhere between 0 and the Pmax of the original from configuration is still modeled as inflexible, as a block, because it cannot set the price in that range. And with that,
So just to clarify that comment, because I think it's important. So the output up to 200 megawatts would be in the supply curve at minus 150, and then because it's fixed. Okay, good.
Yeah, that to us makes sense, because that really is a range that is not operable. It's blocked, it's fixed, and shouldn't be able to set the price. Next slide, please. Now, this is the easy case. There are other cases for MSG that we allowed in the model. And one of them is that in several units, we actually allowed the configurations to overlap. That means the Pmin of the two configurations would be smaller than the Pmax of the from configuration. So you have a common range where they overlap. In that case, what we are doing is that, well, there is really no need for extending the flexible operational range of the unit, because they are already covering by one bit or the other. There is no expansion of the flexible range. We only add the other to the variable bit range. Now, the piece that we were debating internally how to approach it is when it comes to downward transitions. The upward is kind of pretty intuitive what to do. It's similar to a startup. You are going up, and makes sense to do it the way I explained. In the downward transition, you're actually going down in the operational range. So it doesn't make sense to expand the flexible range from the pinning of the two configuration to somewhere else when you are in the downward direction. So for this analysis, and subject to any feedback that we get, we didn't apply this to the downward transition, because it really doesn't make much sense unless we expand the range to the Pmax of the from configuration. That is kind of weird, because again, it's a downward transition. We, in short, have applied this to the upward transitions, very straightforward, mirroring what we do for the startups. We don't apply that to the downward transition just because it seems to be exactly in the opposite direction that the faster pricing is intended to work. But we are open for any feedback that we get in how to treat the downward transitions. Next slide, please. After this basic consideration of the model, this is how a real-life bit curve for the supply stack looks like. This is a specific case of October 19, our ending 18. This is the first interval, the FMM. And there are three lines effectively covering the standard bit, the original bit, and then the two logics that we apply for the fast start pricing, the constant and the average cost. And you're going to see that naturally they are going to diverge at some point. Even in the block part, that is the lower part that is either self-scale or block for the startups, they are going to be different when we incorporate the fast start pricing, because now that fixed block is going to be part of the incremental bit range, right? Because we are modeling the PMIN of those fast start units as flexible. That means they are with a price, and they're going to become part of the variable bit range stack. That is the reason you see some blocks.
You're breaking up again, Guillermo. We can't hear anything.
We're starting to lose you again, Guillermo. It's maybe an opportunity for me to ask a question. Can you hear me, Guillermo?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, you're chopping a little bit again, but we'll see if it continues. Going back to my earlier questions about how exactly the pricing run would work, how does this interact with the congestion then as well? Are we doing something only to SMEC, or are all the LMPs affected, given that the pricing run will have marginal units in different locations than the scheduling run?
Yes. Yeah, we are not able to incorporate congestion management in this approach, Jim. It's system-wide for each balancing area.
Okay, so is the idea here that we have we'll just calculate like a different SMEC, and then the congestion adders are just the scheduling run, or how exactly do we translate this then to nodal prices?
This illustration, Jack, this is just a simplified illustration. The supply curve would still be resources at every location. So you could have the prices go up in one region
and go down elsewhere,
unchanged in another region. So if all the fast start units were in a constrained region, the fast start pricing would only affect prices in that region. And you're calculating, just the pricing run has got a different offer curve for some units. So they could set price at a different location, but it'd still be the same LMP optimization engine that would determine, constraint shadow prices and the reference bus price and everything.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I'm just wondering, there might be certain nodes that wouldn't have any supply then, that might actually in the scheduling run, or I'm trying to think through that.
Well, because like today, I mean, you have flows, it's all in
Yeah.
the transmission system, and you'd have transmission constraints. But the prices on the constrained side might be set by a higher supply curve, because the fast start units would have a higher offer curve than they do in the scheduling run, because they've got these extra costs rolled into them. So on the constrained side, you could see prices that are higher.
And could you see prices that are lower in some places then?
I think generally not.
Right.
You're
Because
raising the supply curve,
Mm-hmm.
and you're taking away some
Okay.
minimum load costs.
But I guess, yeah, the mechanics of this is you're just taking this new bid curve and you're doing the full-on LMP calculation, not just sort of a hybrid.
Right.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
yeah. And let me characterize my answer to your question, Jim. Scott is right that once you have the adjusted bid, we just simply run the full optimization with congestion management and all the resource characteristics, so everything is still in place the same way as the standard pricing. My answer was more specific to the analysis that we are doing, that we cannot just do a full congestion management.
I understand now. Thanks.
Yeah. And what you are going to see is that the one in red, that is the original market bid, is going to be whatever it has to be. The one in either of the two others is going to be, in general, higher than the original market bid. They potentially may be overlapping in some range, and at some point they start to diverge just because of the different nature of how we estimate the bids. And with the ones with the constant adder tending to be higher than the average adder. There is a line somewhere around 35,000 megawatts, where we have this vertical line of the demand. That was the demand that we consider, and the striking point with against each of the three curves is no more than the market clearing price, right? So under the original market bid, the price is going to be under $100, $94 or so, and then the striking price for either of the other two constant or average other is going to give you the price for each of the options that we have for faster pricing that are going to be higher. And that is how this could be illustrated through this numerical example. Next slide, please. Now, going back to somehow the previous team's question, how we are constructing this faster pricing. Well, everything is predicated on the adjusted bid stack. We have these new bids, adjusted bids with higher prices for some resources that incorporates the commitment cost. And this is no more than a simple power balance. We have all the supply in the system to be able to meet our demand. We consider all the generation internal to each balancing area, including the imports that come into the system, including the transfers that are coming into the area through the Western Energy Imbalance Market, and that has to be equal to the demand plus the exports plus the demand from pump storage. We also account for the exports of the EIM transfers going out of that balancing area. We consider the transmission losses. We already know the transmission losses from the optimal solution of the scheduling run. And we also include, indeed, the load conformance in the market because it is additional demand that we're imposing to the system. Now, if you look at this specific from the point of view of the 15-minute market, imports and exports are kind of given because they were already clear in the early ahead scaling process. They are not going to set a price. We are not going to model this as a variable range with bits because it's just a block capacity already given. Imports and exports of transfers. In this case, to incorporate the dynamic of the EIM market, we are taking this also as fixed. That means the scheduling run already determined what the optimal transfers were between each pair of balancing areas. We take the transfers basically as fixed so that now we can discover the price internal to each balancing area. If there was a transfer coming into the case of 1,000 megawatts in the evening, there is additional supply that we already reduced for the supply that has to be met internally. And the same happens when there is an export transfer. If the CAISO is sending 3,000 megawatts of transfers out of the system to other areas in the middle of the day, that means now that capacity is considered as given as additional exports that are going out of the CAISO balancing area, and therefore our internal supply has to meet that. Depending on the market, some of those variables can actually be constants or fixed values. If we were to consider this for the day-ahead market, naturally the imports and the exports would be variable. We have to incorporate the bids with a variable range to be able to set the price. In the 15-minute market, they are again given fixed because we don't clear those in the 15-minute market.
Guillermo, a question.
Yes.
You said you're going to hold the WEAM transfers fixed. That's for the purpose of the simulation, right? If we actually implemented this in the WEAM, they'd be part of the solution and they could change, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, and good clarification, because this is in the context of the analysis we are doing. Correct. Next slide, please.
Guillermo, how maybe it's not enough to affect things, but how did you think about storage in this? Is it being held constant, or are the bids from storage units somehow being integrated in here?
Oh, yes, that's a very good point, Jim. I can tell you what we have done for the analysis. Again, if we were to implement this in the market solution, it would be the full-blown that we currently do. Specific to this analysis, what we have done is a two-step approach. The first one, at times when the storage resources are in charging mode, we consider that as additional demand that the internal supply has to meet, and we don't account for any of the supply side. If they are already charging, they shouldn't be able to provide the variable range for supply. So we only model those as additional demand that the rest of the supply has to meet. If they are in discharge mode, that means they are in supply mode, we consider the operational range for supply. They cannot switch to discharge, to charge to the demand side. And therefore they can set the price in the supply side, in the discharge mode.
Okay, so you're taking their full bid range if they happen to be observed in discharge mode in the hour in question?
Not the full range, only the discharge range.
Okay, so you're basically just assuming they're gonna do what they did under they're gonna do in your counterfactual what they did in the real world, either charging or discharging. Okay.
No, I don't think that's what
That's
you
fine.
said, Guillermo. I thought, I understood you say something different, that if they were discharging, they would be discharging, but they might not be discharging the same amount, that you would use the discharge supply curve. So they would, they could discharge more in the counterfactual, but they couldn't switch to charge.
Correct. They can continue to discharge. It could be different range, but they will not be able to switch direction.
Okay, so you are taking their full, I guess when I said full bid range, I didn't mean all the way into charging. I meant the full discharging bid range, I guess. Yeah. So that is, and I guess it's possible that we might get more energy out of them than they actually charged, but you know, I don't know. We got to do something for a calculation like this. So.
Yeah, and actually, this is going very deep into the little details, and I would love to hear your feedback because this is the starting point of our analysis. If they are in charging mode, it's additional demand, and we don't model any available supply for them.
Mm-hmm.
If they are in discharge mode, we consider they are a supply resource, and therefore they can be accounted for the bid stack. One of the challenges that we have observed is that it moves this in the right way, accounting for the supply when indeed available. One of the challenges that we have is that this doesn't capture the inherent complexity of managing the state of charge.
Yeah.
Because it's a limitation, right? The state of charge has to be managed in the real life system is managed and is considered with other constraints that we have. So what I have been thinking is that potentially I could make this a little bit more limiting to ensure that they cannot charge beyond what they were originally discharged for in the scheduling run. So that the scheduling run determined that they could be optimally dispatched at certain level. We put that to be the new bound that they can be dispatched in this counterfactual, because for some reason the market determined that that was the optimal dispatch they could afford in the discharge. Otherwise, we are opening up the available range that potentially was not indeed available because of managing the state of charge. That could make the simulation a little bit more restrained, more limiting, because we limited the full range of supply, but potentially could be more reflective of what may happen in real market, because under tight supply conditions, most likely they cannot be dispatched anywhere up to the Pmax just because of the managing of the state of charge.
But again, you're talking about the simulation, and in the production version, the pricing run has all the intertemporal constraints and the end of hour constraints and the ancillary service constraints. So we wouldn't have to impose these restrictions in the pricing run. It would just be that would just be part of the optimization, right?
That's correct.
Yep.
Okay, next slide, please. And the last piece, as I indicated, this is not very relevant to the real time. It's more relevant when we are analyzing anything of the day ahead. We have these MOCs that are based on operating procedures and requires that we have certain minimum online capacity for a defined area. This was for the sake of reducing the exceptional dispatches in the ISO market and use more market-driven solutions. The MOCs are currently enforced in the day-ahead market. If, for whatever reason, a fast start unit is considered to be part of an MOC in the day-ahead market and they get dispatched in the day-ahead and so on, by the mere fact that they are fast start units, they will not have a binding commitment when they go into the real time. They will be left up to the real-time market to decide whether to start the unit or not, because they are fast start units. So in that sense, even if there were units as part of the MOC definition clearing the day-ahead market, they have no much effect when assessing the pricing implications in the real time, because it's up to the real time to decide whether to start these units or not. And that is the reason that even though we track what units were part of the MOC, we still consider any fast start unit to be part of the fast start pricing in this adjusted logic, because it's irrelevant if they were part of or not of the MOC in the day-ahead market. Again, when we do the analysis for the day-ahead market, that becomes relevant, because now we have to define whether we should consider the units that are part of the MOC to be subject to fast start pricing or not. And that, again, is not black and white, because depending on the construction of the MOC constraint, even if they are part of the MOC, their commitment may still be driven purely by economics. Years back, for instance, we used to have one type of MOC that included basically every single resource that was part of north of Part 26. And just because of that, many of these commitments were still based on economics, even if they were part of the MOC. On the other hand, there may be some local MOC definitions that you know that any unit that is part of that constraint is going to be forced to be online just because of how small the definition is. So we may have to do some practical considerations of depending on what MOC is part of, whether the unit should be allowed to be part of the fast start pricing or not.
In real time, Guillermo, if we get into an operating situation where the MOC would be binding, do the operators exceptionally dispatch the units on?
Correct, yes.
Okay, and if a unit was exceptionally dispatched on, then it would not be part of fast start pricing, right? It would be blocked on at 0.
Correct, yes.
Yep. Thanks.
Next slide, please. There are some preliminary results that we have. All this first part that I went through is just to give you the flavor of what considerations we took into account for running this analysis of fast start pricing and the implications of that into the CAISO market. This first one is a very simple comparison of the prices. The bars are effectively the same in any of the 4 quadrants that you have. It's just different colors, but they are exactly the same. The bars are compared against specific dots for each of the months. And these dots stand for the newly calculated prices using the fast start pricing logic. Now, there are 4 quadrants, and there are 2 dimensions to this. One is the time of use, the time definition for startup time and minimum uptime, whether they are 30 minutes or 60 minutes. That is just one dimension of the quadrant. The other dimension of the quadrant is whether we are using the constant adder or the average adder. And that will give you the 4 different sensitivity scenarios that we run for this analysis. What if we consider only a startup minimum uptime units with equal or less than 30 minutes? And let's say that we consider the constant amortization. That will be the comparison that you have to look at the upper left corner. And so you can go to any of the 4 sensitivity scenarios. Now, if we just focus on the content of each of these quadrants, what you're going to see is that The bars basically are kind of the same of the dots. There are price differences, but they are so small relative to the standard prices that you cannot really see that at naked eye. And that just gives you the first reference that yes, there are changes, but they are relatively small to the point that even visually they are not that significant. Now we can move to the next slide. That will give you the relative differences between the standard pricing, no fast start pricing, versus either of the two conditions of including fast start pricing. Operator, can we move to the next slide, please? And here you have price differences. It's the same construct of the 40 scenarios, and it's just getting the delta between the standard pricing and the fast start pricing. If you look at the axis, given the fact that we're looking here at differences of prices, the maximum is around $1.2, $1.3, and that was in the summer of 2022. These are monthly average prices. It's not just a specific point, it's just an average. And here you have the 4 permutations. So you can see that when we consider the 30-minute time definition, the price differences are basically the minimums. They are so small on average, I would say again, in comparison when we have the definition of 60 minutes. For either the constant or the average adder, you can see that there are more meaningful differences, and they are actually not that far away when you look at between the constant and the average adder. And they're going to be moving around depending on the conditions of the year. The highest, as I indicated, happen to be during the tight conditions of the summer 2022, so that's not unexpected. And this is only prices, and that just gives you some sense of the direction of the implications of having fast start pricing. If we move to the next slide, please.
Guillermo, there was a question in the chat box, and let me remind the audience that it's best if you raise your hand and ask it verbally, but luckily I caught it before it got off the screen.
Okay.
There was a question about whether these are net of adjustments in bid cost recovery, or bid cost recovery, if reduced, would wind up lowering the average price or average consumer cost impacts.
Yeah, this doesn't internalize in any fashion bid cost recovery. It's just plain comparison of prices produced with one methodology or the other.
Okay, so if these prices represent, say, 100 million per year in additional revenues in the market, but bid cost recovery was reduced by 50 million, then the net would be the net impact would be 50 million, for example. But these net impacts are not calculated here.
Yeah, we haven't reached that point yet.
And the
Right.
distribution of those impacts may be different too, since the
Yes.
responsibility for, uplift may be different than who's paying these marginal prices in different places and stuff like that. But yeah,
Right,
good point.
right.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next slide that goes a little bit into the cost. Oh, sorry, this is still prices. Now, just to give you a better sense of where the prices are changing through the profile of the day. This is just to give you a sense of the times of the day when you can see the price changing between using the standard versus the fast start pricing. Not surprisingly, you can see that the price differences, and again, these are average per hour for the given month of the year that we're analyzing. There are two sets. This is for 2022. The next one is going to be for 2023. And for each of the months, you have this hourly profile. There are indeed 4 lines. It happens that for the 30 minutes, for either constant or average, they are kind of at 0 because they are pretty small. The ones that are more meaningful are the ones specifically for the 60 minutes, either the constant or the average other. And when you see the shape of the trend, I think this makes a lot of sense. You can see that typically the prices are going to tend to be with higher differences for the afternoon, evening ramp and peaks. In some months, depending on the time of the year, you can see that some of those also start to show up in the morning ramp, like in the December time frame. And in the middle of the day or even the shoulder hours of the day, the differences are pretty small. In some cases, they are just around 0. So profile-wise, it makes sense to see these differences when they are happening, because remember, fast start pricing, it's only trying to come with a different price, internalizing the commitment cost. It's not deciding when the unit should be started or not. They are already given. These startups, these transition apps are already determined. It's just a matter of what are now the price implications if we consider fast start pricing. So if you were to ask me why there is a non-zero price, I don't know, at 3 in the morning, well, it means that there was a unit that was started up at 3 in the morning. For whatever reason, the market determined that was the optimal commitment. Now we're assessing what will be the price implications if we do faster pricing. But again, faster pricing is not defining the new commitments or the times of those commitments. It's only the pricing implication. The next slide shows the same information for the year 2023. And the profiles are not that different, I would say. You can see prices spiking mostly during the evening ramp and peaks. Very little in the middle of the day or in the shoulder hours of the day. And the magnitude would be about the same range that we saw. And again, these are average per month. We try to put some type of distribution of the prices, but given how they are distributed, that most of those are around 0, the distribution plot was not very meaningful. We will try to find better ways to visualize that information, because the average still hides a little bit the information of what happens in the extreme. So we want to also give you that type of information. But there may be some cases where price differences were over $100, right? When you're in this almost vertical range of the bid stack, small changes could have a meaningful price difference. Next slide, please. And this one is cost. I have to put a lot of caveats on this metric because it's one partial way to see the implications of fast start pricing. It's not an absolute consideration. This is the cost measured in the following way. We estimate the cost by simply getting a schedule times price, or total demand times price. That is a cost to meet that demand at that price. And we do that for the standard pricing and then for each of the scenarios with the fast start pricing. That difference is what is captured in these metrics. It's just the absolute difference of cost relative from one methodology to the other. And this is confined to the real-time market analysis we're doing for the 15-minute market. However, in real life, we are not setting 100% of the demand or the generation at the real-time prices, because we have this multi-step settlements approach, right? We settle the day ahead, then we settle the differences from the 15 to the day ahead based on the real-time prices, and then from the 15 to the 5 minutes. And that gives you an incremental approach. This one is just measuring the total cost based on the demand that we clear in the 15-minute market times the price of the 15-minute market. And that is the reason you get this level of cost, because you are assuming that everything is settled at the real-time market when the real life is not. In practical terms, I believe the real-time market may be settling anywhere between, I don't know, 5 to 10% of the overall volume of the transactions. So we have to be mindful how we take these numbers as a reference. if we compare just these absolute differences between the different approaches when we settle or estimate the cost of of meeting the total demand, that is the profile that you get. If you look at the lower left corner, when we consider a startup time of 60 minutes for either the constant or the average adder, we have some meaningful dollars here. The maximum cost that we get for the month was in August 2022, and that was about $30 million plus. And it varies depending on the month, depending on the amount of demand that we clear, and depending on the price differences that we get. On average, if you get that specific sensitivity scenario of 60 minutes startup times and the constant adder, we're talking about on average $13.5 million per month. If we move to the average amortization, it's about $10.5 million, because in general, that average amortization approach is going to give you lower price. We have more work to do on that, developing other methods to see how we can come closer to what the actual settlements is doing. This is just to start giving you some sense of the direction of the changes when we have these different logics to incorporate in some fashion the fast start pricing. There were other areas that we have in scope and that we discussed in the working group session last week to try to put together these metrics to the actual BCR, how that impacts the BCR, how the whole picture would look like when you incorporate this cost with the BCR. And we are open for the suggestions of what else we need to put together to get a more complete view of the cost associated with the fast start pricing. So let me pause if we have any comments, feedback, questions at this point.
Oh, this is good, Guillermo. I think I've asked my questions.
Okay, I have just one more slide to cover for the core material. Can we move to the next? Operator?
Yeah, sure. Guillermo, before you go on, I did have a question. I remember from a year or so ago, PowerX and a group of public generators in the Pacific Northwest published a study where they claimed up to, well, it was several hundred million, if I remember right, perhaps as much as $1 billion in a year in revenue differences. Your previous slide, based just on those numbers, would be something like an order of magnitude less, maybe $100 million per year, and not accounting for bid cost recovery adjustments. I just want, perhaps it's an unfair question, but is there anything that you want to say about perhaps why your study seems to show quite a bit less impact on prices than what the PowerX study showed, which I believe was sometimes average numbers as much as impacts as much as $20 per megawatt hour.
Yeah, it's 1.3 billion. I'm looking at the executive summary here.
It was I forget whether it was 1.3 billion over 4 years or 1.3 per year.
Per year.
At any rate,
Per year, but I assume that's the entire WEIM.
So this is just the CAISO, and they were using much longer starting units. You start doing this with long start units and you get all sorts of squirrely outcomes.
Yeah, let me respond as much as I can at this stage, then. Thank you, Jim and Scott, for pointing some nuances here. The first one, this is only for real time so far, and specific to CAISO. This is not for the full west and wide or specific to the wind market and footprint. That is next what we want to do. And that will be one key difference right now. The second one has to do with our effort, right? We have tried to be as accurate as possible to go to the nuances of how our market works, because if you miss to capture these nuances, naturally the price are going to not reflect that. And the other aspect is the considerations of the design, right? What units are able to set the price, and what time definition do you consider? And this is the reason we have tried to be very methodical by going through the resource characteristics, because depending on the assumption that you make, this may not be just very light assumptions, whether you consider 30 versus 60 or longer than 60, right? That can dramatically change the pool of resources that can set the price. How you consider the minimum uptime, only up to the minimum uptime, or allow them to set the price even after they have covered their minimum uptime, can also change the reference point dramatically. So I would say we would be better equipped to try to have some type of comparison when we expand this to the wind market and we solidify what conceptually could make more appropriate for the generation fleet that we have at hand.
Okay.
Yeah, let me jump in also, Ben, a couple other things. I mean, remember that in the WEM, most of the resources are committed by the balancing areas. Only the quick start units are in the actual RTPD. So if you start assuming, make up cost curves for units that were self-committed and then apply this, you get all sorts of squirrely results. It has nothing to do with reality. So and all of that was not based on actual offer prices that RTPD was looking at, or the units committed in the day-ahead market, or just taking what was online and then assuming a set of cost bids for them.
Okay, that's helpful. And since we're talking about comparisons, of course, other markets have I guess 5 out of the 6 FERC regulated ISO markets have or are in the process of implementing fast start. And I don't know if any of those are far enough along that anything can be said about what has actually happened, or whether they've done careful studies like this that also show that show impacts. And of course, those markets are have different rules and different generation mixes. But is there anything to be learned from elsewhere about that gives some perspective as to whether these numbers of about 100 million or so per year, which is, I recognize this is just 1 year and just real time, are in the ballpark and consistent with experience or projections in the other markets?
I may not be up to speed on that survey. Then I remember we were looking into MISO doing some type of cost assessment after they implemented a variation of that. But I don't know, maybe somebody in the policy may have discussed that more openly to the survey or the policy aspects of the process. I would defer to James in case he has anything to say.
It would be worth knowing, but I don't know how comparable comparisons even would be.
This is James. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So yeah, we're in the process of we've gathered information from how the other ISOs have implemented fast start pricing, and it's sort of at a fundamental level, what's the definition of fast start pricing in their areas, but we're trying to get a little bit more detailed down to even the amortization methods that Guillermo talked about earlier, and there's various ways of doing that. So we're in the process of collecting sort of comparative information at a much more detailed level than we have, and we'll be able to share that with stakeholders in, we're hoping, late January.
Great. Definitely look forward to that. We did have a question from a stakeholder, but now I don't see the hand raised anymore.
Stuart, it just went down. Yeah. No, it's back. Stuart Kelly.
Stuart?
Interested in the overall cost of fat start pricing. I recognize this is just CAISO, but the numbers do seem rather low. Based on stuff I've looked at, it's in one other market at least, it was $2 to $3 per megawatt hour annually, and on total volumes. And I think the other aspect of this is, if with EDAM and you have those day ahead, prices and volumes, it would be good to get, a good understanding of the overall cost of this, because albeit it's the fast start units and whatever the definition of that sets the price, the long start still gets it when the price is there. So it just intuitively feels light, particularly when you bring in the bid cost recovery aspects. And maybe it's just me, but it just seems very light in terms of cost. And then the second part of that is, it would be good, if MSC could maybe opine on, CAISO didn't introduce fast start pricing, over the last couple of years, because it was really focused on flex ramp. And what has changed, or what's the MSC's thoughts in terms of, the need for fast start pricing versus, a flexible ramping product, or is there a, potential for some overlap here? If you go down the path of fast start pricing, it'd be good for the MSC to opine on that one.
I'd actually made a note of to what extent is FlexiRamp a substitute or a complement to this, but it had a question mark by it, so I think we should discuss it, but I haven't haven't formulated an opinion on it yet.
I mean, one thing that when you talk about Western EIM, I think some of the states and utilities down in the Southwest have a lot more fast start units than the CAISO has. So I think that's one of the reasons for reconsidering it, is when you start looking at the CAISO mix, it wasn't clear that there are a lot of fast start units that were within the, 30-minute start time, an hour minimum run time. But that when you look at this Desert Southwest, there are a lot more. So they're going to be potentially be on the margin more, and therefore more important than they were in California.
Okay, Guillermo, if you'd like to continue. I'm sorry I've interrupted when you started on slide 32.
And this is the last one, Ben. And it's just to show some movement to what happens when we consider one way or another the implications of faster pricing with FRP. And what we have done is to consider effectively the capacity awarded for FRP, and we consider that as given, right? In reality, they may be price responsive still in the pricing run and be able to move differently. We assume that the schedules remain fixed, and therefore this capacity is set aside that is no longer available for energy, and therefore to set the price. When we compare the implication of the price with and without FRP, the capacity considered, you can estimate what is the opportunity cost of having considered the FRP capacity in the clearing process of either of the following scenarios. And what we saw is that when we take that approach and consider the economical displacement of FRP, prices continue to be kind of in the lower range. And we see price variation for less than 10% of the interval when we run the simulation for these 2 years. And the maximum price difference that we see is a little bit over $100. So still, for the vast majority of the interval, we see no much opportunity cost for FRP, reflected with basically zero or near zero prices. And that's really what we have. There is material in
Guillermo, just on this
the-
diagram, I have a question because it's very hard to figure anything out from this figure. I mean, I think what you're talking about is that when when the fixed block pricing goes into effect, prices will rise, and therefore the opportunity cost of FlexiRamp will be higher, and therefore the price will go up. And I think we need a table I mean, the FlexiRamp prices are small as they are, and zero in most of the hours, but I can't tell if non-zero prices less than 10%, but I mean, the question is how much do they go up? And I can't tell. That might be 100% increase relative to, I think we need a table to show what were the FlexiRamp prices and revenues in the production case, and what are they in this case, to understand the impact.
Sure, we can expand that for the next round.
Yep.
I was indicating that the rest of the material is an appendix. There is some breakdown specific for the CAISO when it comes to the generation fleet, to the VCR, and also 2-3 slides regarding the math behind the constant adder and the average adder, in case you want to see how the formula applies specifically when you have units with minimum uptime of different than an hour, because that is where Jim was going earlier today, how they may change when you have to incorporate that for just 15 or 30 minutes, something different than an hour, and how you arrive to the average cost. So again, as Jane indicated, we are going to have all discussion on this aspect in early January, and hopefully we can go deeper specific to the logic and the calculation of the amortization, given the possible variations that we may have at hand to utilize specific to the CAISO. Thank you for your time. I'm open, Quinn and I are open for any follow-up questions, closing remarks that you may have.
Thank you, Guillermo. So let's open up the phone lines. As a reminder, #2 on your phone, or raise your hand on the lower right on your WebEx. It would be great to get some suggestions, which Guillermo will get. We'll get to a slide in a minute about what further should be looked at. We've heard definitely some in terms of impacts on and bid cost recovery and some of the distributional impacts there. And as James said, we're going to be hearing also about studies done elsewhere later in January. If there are other things that folks think would be helpful. And Quinn, thank you also very much for your part of the presentation. I don't see any hands up.
We have a question from Dan Williams.
Oh, great. Dan?
You hear me okay?
Yes.
Hey, thanks. This is Dan Williams from the Energy Authority. I was having some technical problems seeing the presentation, but did just want to note, if we're looking at any of the flexible ramp product outcomes, just how much the determination of the requirements has changed over even over this year, just as different policies were put into place. The procurement of it has moved around pretty significantly, even up until the changes that went into place in September. So I don't know if we did some sensitivity was shown around that, but going forward, definitely it'd be nice to kind of refresh numbers based on the current procurement constraints.
Thank you. And let me clarify what we did. So we effectively take whatever the binding requirements for FRP were for every 15-minute market. So we don't make assumptions on those. We just took effectively what was in place in production for that interval for that market. Based on that, could you expand on your question? Are you looking for what else you would be looking in terms of sensitivity if we are taking at face value whatever the requirement in place is at that interval?
So just, and again, having a hard time with my technology, seeing the slides. So just my assumption based on what you had said would be that, you know, the new nodal constraints that went into place back in September have changed sort of where the flex ramp is being held and the quantities within the CAISO. And then, so my assumption had been that kind of looking back at past volumes may not be as indicative of the future volumes, and then that could have a bearing on the relative impact of fast start pricing to flex ramp, just as those inputs and targets have been moving around so much.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan. Just be curious, as more constraints have been added to on the FRP side of the market software over this year since last February. Is there been any change in the last handful of months in terms of the frequency of non-zero prices and the costs, or has it been pretty much what we've been seeing over the entire year?
Yes, I can elaborate on that. I would say even the reference how to measure that is different, and this is something that we struggled last time to illustrate, because in the past we could easily measure how frequently prices were non-zero for FRP before nodal implementation, right? Because the only thing that you have to do is to check the shadows of the requirement. If you have a non-zero price on the shadow price, you know that it was binding and it was active, and just to have a case to make for that interval. Now with the nodal, the prices are locational. So whether an interval has a meaningful non-zero price is still not that straight to classify. And we have tried two ways to measure that frequency. If we still try to refer only to the instances where the shadow price of the constraint is binding, regardless of any potential interplay with congestion, you can see that it's still, I would say, in general, very low frequency of non-zero prices. That hasn't changed dramatically with the implementation of the nodal price. There are some price separations in some few instances where you see meaningful locational differences, but the core of the question that I believe is what you're asking, Ben, is that we haven't seen a dramatic or material difference in the frequency of prices after nodal implementation.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That's a good summary. Okay. I don't see any other hands raised, so I think we just have a next step slide.
Yes, can we move to the next slide, please? And I will close my discussion with this one. We are scheduled to have a final analysis. We want to put all the pieces together once we have this preliminary analysis, all the feedback, expanding this to the EIN areas, and potentially consider further implications of the cost, right? In trying to bring together the extra cost relative to the VCR. And the idea that we have this analysis completed somewhere in March, and we will publish a report, and we will bring it for discussion to the working group. So we would really appreciate if there are any feedback that participants can provide us before we start going too deep into the final analysis, so that we can have time to incorporate those if we find that there are merits to those comments and suggestions. And we have another internal or informal discussion about the amortization in January. And with that, we really are just moving along the way to have this final analysis for March. Thank you for all your feedback and your ideas that give us a good reference of what else we may have to incorporate for this final stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Guillermo. It was good. June?
Yeah, I have just one last question, which is, I think it goes back to why we're doing this, or one metric for assessing or comparing different systems for doing this. There was a great presentation that Tongxin Zheng made 3 or 4 years ago at the FERC June Market Software Conference about different methods for doing short start pricing and the objectives that could be used. And a point he made, which I think is right, that no system is perfect. Any choice is going to be somewhat arbitrary. We're all interested in simplicity and transparency and efficiency. And one dimension of efficiency, and this is something that Dane Shiro of ISO New England has emphasized, and as well as whether the prices that come out are supporting the schedules. And there's 2 dimensions to supporting. One is, well, if you need to make whole payments, then folks who are being scheduled are losing money, and the market prices aren't supporting their schedules, or at least part of them. But the other side of that, and we haven't been addressing this at all, is whether there are folks who are not scheduled, but would have been able, but under the market prices would have been able to be able to make money, and might prefer to be dispatched rather than not dispatched. And of course, if prices are increased by these making these changes to pricing of short start units, then if there's a problem with folks not, with some resources not being scheduled, who look at the prices and say we should be scheduled, then the incentives for them to deviate from the schedules will be worsened by the higher prices. And so we haven't talked about that the other side of the coin of non-supporting prices, of wanting to keep people who are not being scheduled, not wanting to see themselves, not wanting them to see violating dispatch instructions in order to chase prices. And I'm wondering if we, Guillermo, if we have any sense at all to what extent that flip side might presently be an issue or significant at all in the Western markets. Of that is, again, people being held to a zero schedule, but they could make money under the prices, and so having an incentive to deviate in the upward direction. Maybe that's not a problem at all. Or if it is a problem, it conceivably could be worsened, and that's something that could perhaps be looked at. So anyway, Guillermo, if you have any prices on, any comments on that aspect of non-supporting prices and how that might be impacted, I'd be definitely interested.
Wow, that's a very interesting concept. Then I think we do have information available that we would be able to put together to try to get an idea how meaningful this could be. We right now don't have anything prepared or ready to have an idea of what this is in terms of the extent. So I may have to think through and see if we can have a way to come with any measurements for that.
Right. I recognize this is not something you've been collecting information of, and I haven't seen anything, over the past years that indicates that it is a problem in the West. And if there is some evidence of that, then that might indicate that that problem could be worsened. But if there isn't, this isn't any. So anyway, if it turns out you can look at that easily, I think that would be intriguing to see whether this is just simply an academic concern and not a practical one, or whether in fact we might be making some incipient problem more severe.
I mean, it's not just units at zero, is it? It's any
or anything held down.
Yeah, or
that-
anything
that
yeah,
could
that would,
go up.
it seems like any fast start unit even would, they're getting a market price that's above its incremental marginal cost. And so everybody has kind of a upward incentive, but I don't know how worried we are about price chasing. I'm not sure whether we're not seeing it today is informative either, given that we're not doing fast start pricing. So there are other imbalances. Scott, you're muted, so I think you've been.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I think the logic and the reason rationale for fast start pricing is just the other way. We want people to, when we're running gas turbines that cost $200 and the price is $70, we don't have the right incentive for people to schedule imports. We don't have the right incentive for price responsive load and the logic is that when that other supply shows up, we can turn off the gas turbines or we won't need to turn them on in the first place because they'll respond. And so that's what we want. Is part of the idea is to get the response to the true cost is, and this depends on what the logic is, but in New York and probably in Arizona and Nevada, if you're turning on a fast start unit one after another on a hot summer day, then if you get some additional imports, you don't need to turn one on. And if you get some additional load response, you don't need to turn one on. So the idea is that we want to send the true price signal, because if you're turning them on, if you've just got one running, then yeah, it doesn't make any difference. But if you're turning them on one after another, then if you get some response, you don't have to turn one on. And you don't have to go to your most highest cost fast start units. You only run the most efficient ones. And that's hard to measure. But that's part of the logic, is that we want to get those things to happen. And now when we get behind the meter networks and stuff like that, it's really more important to have them responding to the actual cost. And a battery, we want somebody to be charging because they think the price is $70, but we're turning on gas turbines for them at $200 for them to buy at $70.
Yeah. So Scott, I definitely agree with all that. And when we talked about this, what was it, 15 years ago, when California first implemented something like the New York system, I agreed with that. So I think where might we have a situation where we don't want people to chase prices, where the prices might be increased? Conceivably in overgen situations or in the belly of the duck, that this, I'm not sure why we would have short start units online and running, but relaxing their minimum run levels, allowing that to set prices, conceivably could increase prices in such circumstances and might worsen overgen situations. And
but
that
that's where
purely
design comes in, because if you've got a lot of other supply, the fast start unit would be dispatched to zero, and it wouldn't set price, so you wouldn't have the big increase. But that's why you got to worry about when it gets extended to units with minimum run times of 1 or 2 hours or 3 hours that can't be turned off and are running at times like that. And I'm worried about, that's why the idea of units that are providing reserves being fast start pricing applied to them. gets more problematic, because then, yeah, then you do have units running in the belly of the duct that you can't turn off because they're on for reserves. So I think that goes to, what kind of units you make it eligible for. But if it's just a pure fixed block unit that you're turning on for load and it has a 1 hour minimum runtime, then we don't need it. You can turn it off. So any issues are transitory.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that's an advantage of keeping it limited to 30 or 60 minutes rather than something longer.
So
Okay.
maybe you guys can help me understand. So I've been trying to think through the timing and what I guess the market sees and doesn't see in like a discussion such as this. Because I guess the idea is if the market sees everything and has enough time to optimize it, then it's all captured in the scheduling run, and we wouldn't want anybody chasing prices up or down because the scheduling run is in theory sort of already considered everything and found the right answer.
That's only on dispatch resources, Jim. It doesn't say whether somebody outside the market's going to schedule interchange. And if they see the price is 70 and they got $100 hydro unit, they're not going to offer it. But if they see 200, they will offer it. And we don't see the offer, because if they're submitting price taking import bids, they're going to look at the price. And if we've got somebody that's behind the meter resource, they don't care. They're not in HASP. They're not in RTP. They're going to respond to the price. So if we don't set the right price, they'll never respond.
Yeah, I can see this behind the meter. I guess with imports, it depends on whether they're price taking imports or not. If they actually had a price bid, then in theory it should be part of it. But that's why I was trying to sort of sort out also the real time versus day ahead, where you have more time to optimize kind of aspects of this as well. So yeah, I guess there's always things that are missed by the market, but I'm still trying to kind of understand the the delineations here.
Yeah, but if you go back to MISO and NISO, the import incentives was a big issue. And MISO, of course, has price taking imports. And so if the price is low, the imports don't come. And NISO does scheduling like CAISO, but still we observe that a lot of people don't want to go through the scheduling process if they're not going to flow. So they only offer when they think the price is right. And they offer price taking because they buy the power and then they sell it. So they're going to look at the price. And if the price is 70, they're not going to offer.
So that's why you consider the hour as sort of the natural delineation between what's fast start and what's kind of something that doesn't need to affect the prices, because the imports are sort of happening on this hourly cycle. And if that's the sort of big...
Yeah, that's one of the rationales that, they're going to respond in some period to those, and also that you can turn units off when within a short period of time if they only have a 1 hour minimum runtime. But also just you have to look at your resource mix, and you may find that most of your fast start units have a 1 hour minimum runtime. So you either do it or don't do it, because if you choose any number less than an hour, you won't have any units.
Yeah, I guess I was trying to think of whether what the I guess the principle is here, because you take it to one extreme, you don't want capital costs to be considered in the pricing, and so then you start taking it down. And then what about super long start units that are multi-day? Well, that's still like outside of even a dam optimization, and trying to sort of understand the principles that are deciding 30 or 60 count as fast and something longer doesn't. And it does seem to be linked to this idea of there are responses happening outside of the optimization that we want to send signals to,
right?
And what's the time frame that we want to be focused on for that, which I guess that, and just talking through, so yeah, with imports it's hourly. I guess it maybe doesn't have to be forever, but it certainly is at the moment. And that's a natural link there. All right, thanks, Ben.
James wanted to talk.
Hey there, I'm trying to be strict with my use of the unmute button because there's an echo on my side if somebody talks, so I didn't want that to happen. But I just wanted to mention for Ben's original question about part of the survey that we're doing with the other markets is to understand whether and how they've implemented lost opportunity cost type uplift, as he described. So I just wanted to throw out there that that's another aspect that we'll be studying. Thanks.
Thank you, James. There was a comment in the chat from Dan Williams. I don't know if you want to say anything, Dan. Otherwise, people can see your comment. Okay, Guillermo, again, thanks to you and Zhu and Quinn for preparing this, and we'll look forward to further results and those further discussions you mentioned, James. Jim, Scott, anything else you want to say?
No.
Well, here we are 4 minutes early. I think we can all celebrate that. And speaking of celebrations, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, happy Kwanzaa, whatever you're celebrating this week. Wish you that, and a happy New Year. And look forward to seeing you perhaps at an in-person meeting in the end of January, beginning of February. We're working on scheduling something now. So, Adrian, I think at this point we can end the call.
All right. Thank you all, everybody. You may now disconnect.